Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Kohler Group's Hong Kong versus Singapore webinar series. This is part 1 of 5 webinar sessions, and today's webinar is entitled Hong Kong Companies, Are They Still Relevant for Doing Business in Asia? Before we begin today's session, I would just like to make sure that the line is stable. So if all attendees could click the hand button in the control panel, that will allow me to know that the sound system is functioning. In addition, there will be a very short Q&A at the end of today's presentation. Please don't be shy. If you have questions or comments, submit them in the questions section of the control panel, and we will try to get to them during the Q&A. If we run out of time, please note that we will be contacting you directly in order to answer all of your questions and comments later on throughout today and tomorrow. For those of you that are new to Kohler Group's webinar series, I would just like to briefly introduce who we are. Kohler Group is a subsidiary of CSC, Corporation Service Company out of the US. The group has 3 entities in Asia, primarily in Hong Kong, Singapore, and in China, with 8 subsidiaries in China. We provide a wide range of services to foreign investors who are looking to enter the Asian market. The services range from incorporation, tax, accounting, HR, and any other miscellaneous services that are needed for administrative compliance when registering and running an entity in Asia. One of our unique advantages is that we have an international desk of consultants that speak over 10 languages. We have also just over 120 employees sitting within the 3 jurisdictions that we operate in. A little bit about myself. My name is Christina Kohler-Colucci. I'm a director at Kohler Group. I've been with the firm since 2003 when I first moved to Shanghai to open our very first China office. I've been representing my Western clients in terms of their business interests in expanding into the Asian market, primarily Hong Kong and China, but as of late also into Singapore. I assist these clients with market entry advisory, so pre-investment advisory, as well as all post-investment compliance procedures that need to occur. I'm co-author of our China Invest.biz monthly magazine, which, if you're interested in subscribing to, can be easily done so on our homepage on our website by simply just inserting your email address. So without further ado, let's begin today's presentation. Hong Kong companies, are they still relevant? Now, the reason why this topic for me is of great interest is because when I am meeting clients of late, there are a lot of obstacles that are occurring in the Hong Kong market, making it much more difficult for foreign investors to enter. As a result, very simply, clients are questioning, is Hong Kong a market we should go into? In reality, what are the advantages that Hong Kong can offer to me, particularly if I'm looking to go into the Asian market in general? Now, one of the key things that I want to do throughout this presentation is, one, look at the advantages and give you some of, I'm usually not a fan of statistics and numbers, but in order to be able to convince you in reality what the advantages are that Hong Kong has to offer, I do want to throw in a few statistics and key points that are being raised by our clients about the advantages of what Hong Kong has to offer, and what many people aren't really aware of because it's not highlighted in the media. We'll then look at the pros, the cons, the disadvantages of what is existing in the market, and then we'll sum it up to see, in reality, what is the actual situation that's occurring. So the first slide is highlighting why establish a Hong Kong company. Well, Hong Kong is one of the most important key locations in the Asian region for trade, finance, regional headquarters, and as is usual, has been named one of the freest economies by the US-based Heritage Foundation. Hong Kong is always competing with Singapore, but if you look at it and compare it to all the other Asian jurisdictions, whether that be even the mature markets such as Korea, Japan, there are disadvantages in terms of going into those locations versus starting off your operations in Hong Kong and expanding from there. Now, one of the key things that I highlighted was regional headquarters. In general, this is looking at multinational companies that are coming into the region, but not just multinational companies, also small, medium-sized companies that are looking to develop a regional headquarter to centralize their operations and expand then into the Asian region. Now, as we can see from this table, if you look at column 2, number of regional headquarters in Hong Kong, you'll see the numbers are increasing. Not dramatically, but very stable increases year on year. And in 2015, there were 1,401 registered regional headquarters in Hong Kong. And I've divided that number into the top 7 jurisdictions from which these multinationals are actually coming from. The first location is the United States with 307. The next, which is always a surprise to me, is Japan, which is 238, and I'll reflect on that a little bit later. One which is not a surprise to me is China with 133, and again, we'll delve into that a little bit later. And this is followed by the UK, Germany, France, Switzerland, which, as you can imagine, are some of the key economies globally. And Switzerland, for me, it's a European based headquarter that is then looking to set up a subsidiary as a regional headquarter in Hong Kong. So as you can see, really you're looking at the main economies of the world. The multinationals and the large SMEs are making that decision about setting up their regional headquarters in Hong Kong. And let's face it, there's always going to be competition against Singapore. And we'll look at that a little bit later on in today's presentation. Now, I cannot do any Hong Kong presentation without delving a little bit into some political sayings that are received through Invest Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Trade and Development Council. So I feel it is an obligation for me to highlight the top 10 advantages of locating in Hong Kong, and to also reflect how this then compares to other Asian jurisdictions. So let's face it, Hong Kong, very easy market to get into. The economy is built on free enterprise, free trade, free market that is open to all. There are no trade barriers, no quotas, no foreign exchange controls. It's a low tax environment. It is politically stable, and this point 8, I'll delve into it as well later on, but for me, from my perspective, having been born and raised in Hong Kong and continuously working within the Hong Kong market, it is extremely politically stable. It provides security as well as a free flow of information and communications. Now, this slide highlights the advantages, and obviously to any market that you're going to go into, there are disadvantages. But let's focus a little bit on the top 7. So for me, free enterprise, free trade, free market, no trade barriers, no quotas, no foreign exchange controls. Very simply, this compares to the Chinese market, where you do have restrictions on trade, on quotas, on foreign exchange. You have certain restrictions in terms of being able to be free in order to operate your businesses. And this is then compared to Hong Kong, where you just have the liberalization and the liberty to do what you want to do. In addition to that, there's a low tax environment. Now, the low tax environment is where a lot of the debate is occurring right now about whether Hong Kong is still relevant. But as of today, compared to many other Asian jurisdictions, even on a global scale, Hong Kong is a low tax environment. And the question is, how are you going to optimize your business? Not evade taxes, but optimize your business so that you can take advantage of that low tax environment. Now, the last three, the politically stable, the security, the free flow of information, I think it comes down to how you define those three categories. And we'll delve into that a little bit later on in the presentation as well. Now, the first pro for me is Hong Kong's strength, which is its access into mainland China. Now, as many of you who are attending today's presentation may be aware, and some others may not be aware, one of the key difficulties about operating in the Hong Kong market at the moment is opening and maintaining bank accounts. And I'll explain that in greater detail later on. This all began in 2015, and I have this beautiful statistic here from Invest in China, which I try to obtain on an annual basis. And my perspective when looking at the 2014 stats, I was really curious to see the 2015 ones because I had a belief that the percentage of companies from Hong Kong going into the Chinese market would start to diminish because people were not attracted anymore into going into the Hong Kong market because of the difficulties of opening the Hong Kong bank accounts and maintaining those accounts. But according to the stat, I'm completely wrong. The statistic, the number, 73% of all foreign investment that is going into the Chinese market is still being spearheaded from Hong Kong. 73%. So regardless of all the all the cons that I'm going to mention today, it's very clear to see that investors still want to use Hong Kong, regardless of the obstacles. They're actually being patient and waiting to succumb to those obstacles. They are still using Hong Kong to go into the Chinese market. Now, this is followed very far behind by Singapore, where it's 5.5%. And then Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan, for me, those are direct investments. So those are Taiwanese companies, South Korean companies, Japanese companies that are going direct into the Chinese market to make their investments. For me, Hong Kong and Singapore, yes, you will have some local companies going direct, but the majority of those stats really do reflect the amount of foreign investors that are using Hong Kong and Singapore as a hub to go into the Chinese market. And the last three in the stats are the US, Germany, and France, where again, if you look at the statistics, very little is moving directly into the Chinese market space. Now, why is Hong Kong utilized as this hub for going into mainland China? Well, as mentioned on the previous slide, on the previous two slides, the first two reasons really are the fact that multinationals as well as large SMEs are establishing their regional headquarters in Hong Kong in order to then expand from the Hong Kong market into China or into other Asian jurisdictions. But they're centralizing their management, they're centralizing their finances all out of Hong Kong in order to be able to then expand into the other regions. The other reason from my perspective in terms of why Hong Kong is utilized is fear. There is still this level of fear, particularly for smaller companies that want to go into the Chinese market, about the political instability in China, the language barriers, the corruption that may exist, difficulties with your trademark registrations and people stealing your patents and copyrights, there is still this fear. And for them, it is a starting point, a gateway to go not only in the Chinese market, but also into all the other Asian markets. They utilize Hong Kong because of its stable investment environment. It's protected by fair, transparent courts that have long established rules of law. It's governed by common law system, so it's easy to understand what regulations exist in the market. Regulations don't change on a daily basis, so there's no fear or worry that something that helped you create your budget and your investment plan is going to alter that in 1 month or in 1 year. It gives you that security level that you need in order to be able to go into these more, and I don't want to say China is still an emerging market, it's very well developed, but it gives you that confidence to take that step to go into that market of 1.3 billion people, and more importantly, it gives you that opportunity to do market research. To set up a Hong Kong company, it's easy, it's simple. The obstacle lies in the bank account openings, which I will delve into. But to actually open up your Hong Kong company, it's very straightforward, very simple, very quick. Almost 2 weeks for you to have a name, to have your licenses. So the speed, the efficiency, it all helps you to set up your office in Hong Kong and to start doing market research. Now, what a lot of people would then say to me is, yes, but Christina, in Hong Kong, the standard of living is so high, wages are high, salaries are high, rent is high. Wouldn't it be better for me, in order to save costs, to go into Shanghai or Beijing or Shenzhen or Guangzhou directly? Well, my answer is the following. Look at the stat that you're looking at right now. Obviously, with 73% of all companies starting off in Hong Kong before going into China, basically the answer is no. And the reason is the following. Standard of living is going up in China as well. If you look at salary ranges in the Tier 1 as well as some of the Tier 2 cities like Tianjin, Ningbo, Wuxi, Wuhan, you are looking in these cities, at salary ranges that are now very much comparable to Hong Kong levels, particularly for mid-management. In addition to that, whereas previously a lot of companies were paying hardship allowances in terms of moving into China, these hardship allowances are being revoked because it really isn't a hardship to live in China anymore. In many cases, it's still quite a luxury. If you look at real estate prices in Shanghai, for example, or even in Shenzhen. In Shenzhen, in 2016, January to August, real estate prices went up by 30%. So when people start saying, I want to make a comparison in terms of office rent, residential rent, to understand, it's very much comparable to Hong Kong levels. So in terms of saving costs, make that comparison and you will honestly see that there's not much difference between Hong Kong and China, particularly in the main cities where most of these foreign investors are looking to go into in terms of doing that. Now, another key opportunity and advantage for many people about Hong Kong when comparing the Asian region is entrepreneurship and startups. So basically, within the last 4 years, there's been an organization that's been spearheaded through the government. Invest Hong Kong has been one of them, the Hong Kong Trade Development Council as well, called startmeup.hongkong.hk. And basically, this is a competition that's held on an annual basis. The results are provided in January, so the next one will be January 2017. And it is an opportunity for any type of entrepreneur to submit an application in order to receive subsidies and government funding from the Hong Kong government in terms of starting up their business in Hong Kong. Now, in the last 4 years, there have been over 200 startups that have been founded in Hong Kong. A third of those have been from the US and France, and the third place thereafter is the UK. What Hong Kong is trying to do, it's trying to replicate itself as a startup hub similar to Silicon Valley, London, Tel Aviv, and what's very interesting is that it's not industry specific. Basically, the Hong Kong government is saying anybody in the education field, technology field, financial services, e-commerce, biotechnology, medical services, if you have a great idea, submit your application and let's see where this will take you. And it's a very competitive field. There are numerous countries that are competing in it. Even Chinese entrepreneurs, mainland Chinese entrepreneurs, are also trying to participate in this Start Me Up Hong Kong opportunity scheme. Now, I wanted to provide a little bit of a case study that I found through Invest Hong Kong in terms of an individual from Holland who decided to compete in this Start Me Up competition. He was previously living in Cambridge, and he had the idea of setting up a semiconductor company, which was basically to design and supply low-cost, energy-efficient chips, which would increase the power supplies of laptops and phone chargers. Basically, he won. To sum up before I go on why he chose to compete and why he chose Hong Kong. Basically, within the first year, he had already a team of 10 people. He had located his laboratory in the Hong Kong Science Park. And for him, the key point was that China was not his only market. And that's something that nowadays people are forgetting. People are assuming that their first and only market should be China. But in reality, this gentleman also decided to go into the Taiwanese market, and he did it at the same time. Now, why did he decide to choose Hong Kong? What incentives were being offered to him if he would win? So the incentives offered by the Hong Kong government included a 3 million Hong Kong dollar interest-free loan, free office rent for 2 years in the Hong Kong Science Park, a 50% reduction in rent for the following 2 years. In addition to that, he felt very confident in terms of the skills that the employees that he would be able to recruit and find would have the skill levels, the maturity level to help him build up his business. He had no issues in terms of language because all of the employees were speaking fluent English as well as then Mandarin and Cantonese, which were their primary languages, but the issue for him was really to find people that spoke fluent English. The wages and salary levels were much lower than in Europe, so for him that was quite a high incentive. The cultural aspect for him made it much more interesting to set up in Hong Kong for the fact that it's a melting pot of culture. You can find every nationality, you can learn from one another, and it makes it much more interesting. The last and final point was intellectual property. He felt that by being located in Hong Kong, he could register his trademark, register his patents, and be fully 100% protected versus doing that direct in China. In addition to that, setting up his company was very easy, very straightforward. And as he was creating operational substance in Hong Kong, meaning he was setting up a physical office, employing people on the ground, he had no trouble opening the bank accounts. So, excuse me, that was one of the key aspects for him in terms of applying and then finally being able to win and start up his business and be operational. Now, I've mentioned through this case study the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park. And one thing that, from my perspective, people are not always aware about in certain industries and sectors is that Hong Kong does offer two industrial parks. One is the Cyberport. The Cyberport is basically an industrial park in the southern district of Hong Kong Island that is attracting all types of IT companies that are developing digital content, applications and solutions. So if you would look at some of their top tenants, it would be Cisco, Microsoft, Rockwell, that are all located at TV5, if you know the French TV channel. They're all located here in order to share ideas, and on top of that, share specialized facilities that are required for these types of industries. Now, what's interesting is that the Cyberport does not have any type of preferential policies in terms of who they want to attract. Basically, it's an application procedure. They'll show you the facilities, how much space they have remaining in the facility, and they will also assist you in terms of finding qualified staff in any type of sector. What's also interesting is that the Cyberport offers an entrepreneurship program. So outside of the Start Me Up program, you also have these specialist programs that are being offered by these industry parks. And as mentioned here, you get office rent for free. You can start off in an incubation system and then upgrade yourself into a proper office facility. You get seed money. They help you to protect your IP, your patents. You might even get some financial assistance in terms of marketing, interns, training, legal advice. So it's a great opportunity for newcomers that are coming into the region to work with the Cyberport in terms of understanding what they can actually offer you and whether they have space available for you. The other is the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park, and basically this is a beautiful park out in Sha Tin area, New Territories area, that is promoting a hub for innovation and technology development. So a lot of companies that are going out there is biotech companies, medical device companies, entrepreneurs that have brand new ideas in terms of developing research and development, in terms of developing products. Currently they have about 600 companies located there. About 13,000 people are employed. They have beautiful laboratories that can be rented out versus you investing and building your own lab. They have incubation programs, and they also provide entrepreneurship programs and subsidies to companies that are looking for financing. So, you know, again, not many people are aware of the Cyberport and the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park. It is industry specific, so you have to make sure that your traditional trading hubs are not going to be located. Traditional trading companies are not going to be located in these parks. You really have to be geared in the digital content sector, e-commerce, or in the biotech, medical device type sectors. So please do be aware of that. I think it's something that's key that people should be aware of in order to see what additional benefits can be offered to you when going into the region. Now, another aspect for me, because this is a key and huge topic in China, is e-commerce. And I've listed here a bunch of statistics that I don't really want to spend time on in this webinar, but you know, the presentation will be distributed to you at the end, so you'll be able to go through the stats in greater detail. But basically, this e-commerce industry is enormous, not only in China, but also Hong Kong, because a lot of companies have certain restrictions applied to them if they want to go into the Chinese market and do e-commerce. So for example, if you want to register your products or have a shop on Tmall or any of these online platforms, they now generally require you to actually establish an entity in China, which is greater investment, time, and headache than if you would start off in Hong Kong. So a lot of companies, because they're unsure about how successful they will be in terms of the e-commerce market, a lot of them are starting off in Hong Kong in order to do market research and understand the market better, and see whether they can get into the Chinese market. And what a lot of companies are finding out is that eventually China is not the only market that is out there. They can also start selling from Hong Kong into numerous other locations. And because there is free trade, no quotas, no trade barriers, they are able to build a small fulfillment center in Hong Kong without any duty costs either, in order to be able to ship off direct from Hong Kong to all the other Asian markets. I've listed here a website which shows a couple of e-commerce companies through the Startup Hong Kong Foundation that have been successful in the Hong Kong market. And if you'd be interested in reviewing those case studies, I would definitely recommend it as well. Now, I cannot go through the advantages of what Hong Kong has to offer without looking at Hong Kong as a traditional trading hub, because that is still a big, big portion of why companies want to utilize Hong Kong in terms of attacking or penetrating the Asian market. Now, traditionally, Hong Kong was used as a sourcing hub. You basically sourced products that were produced in Hong Kong, sourced products that were produced in the region, and then you utilized Hong Kong also as a trading hub, as a shipment hub without the goods actually touching Hong Kong. So basically, Hong Kong bought the goods from the suppliers and sold them direct to the customers in Europe, in the US, in Australia, etc. And this is the traditional format of how Hong Kong built itself over the last 100 years, was truly as a traditional trading hub paradise. And there were a lot of advantages, and still are a lot of advantages, surrounding that in terms of taxes, and in terms of just trading advantages. As I mentioned, no trade barriers, no duty costs, no value-added taxes, etc. So the import business and the export business has been a key component to Hong Kong's success, and is still a key component to Hong Kong's success. And again, I've listed here a bunch of statistics to show how it is still something of great value to the Hong Kong market in terms of acting as a traditional trading hub. Now, the other key, and for me quite important factor, is intellectual property. Nobody, and I'm saying this honestly, every single client that I meet initially, prior in this pre-investment stage of going and penetrating the market, never focuses on IP. They never focus on registering their trademarks, registering their patents, and protecting this. This is way at the bottom of their checklist. Generally, their first priorities are, in which jurisdiction should I go into? Where can I really start generating my business, generating sales, making profit? Where can I find employees quickly, and those that are skilled laborers as well? And the list goes on. The list goes on and on, and then right at the bottom, it's usually me saying, well, what about your IP? Do you have a brand that you want to protect? Do you have a patent that you want to protect? And this is usually something that then they go, oh, well, yeah, you're right. And quite frankly, registering your IP is the simplest part of actually penetrating a market. Registering your trademark, registering your patent, although it takes a lot of time to do, once you've registered it, it's actually a first-to-file system. So if you're the first one to file that brand or that logo or that name or that patent, then usually you have the right as long as it's not been registered thus far. So very simple process actually. Doesn't cost you a lot of money, but protects you in the long run. And Hong Kong is really trying to build itself as an IP hub. And the government is investing over the next 3 years $3 million US in the Hong Kong market in terms of developing IP consultation, manpower training, and other services in terms of being able to protect your IP, not only in Hong Kong but throughout the region. Now I've listed here a lot of advantages that have already been developed. You have a sound legal framework, you have a robust IP protection. Hong Kong is ranked 10th out of 144 economies in IP protection. It has a sound financial regime, so developing any type of repatriation schemes for tax optimization can be done. You have the ability to acquire financing if needed. You have good support services. It's a great gateway into the Chinese market. And I just want to emphasize here, if you register your IP in Hong Kong, it does not mean that the IP is registered in China. That would still need to be done. But that's the same in any other jurisdiction. If your IP is registered in Hong Kong, it does not mean it's registered in Japan, in Korea, and in other locations. But what I'm trying to highlight here is if you are building a regional headquarter and you want to develop not only repatriation strategies surrounding your IP, or you want to have your IP centralized in one location and owned by one entity, Hong Kong is a great hub to be able to do that. In addition, there's research and development and creative capabilities. It's developing itself as a dispute resolution center for Asia, and naturally, it's a good support for incubated companies, particularly those that are looking to set up in the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park, or those that are looking to set up in the cyberport. So Hong Kong is an IP hub, definitely something also to consider and to move up in your checklist of items to one of the first 1 or 2 things that you really should be doing. For those of you that are not aware, if you have been to a trade fair and you have had a booth of your own and you've had your logo displayed and your brand displayed and you haven't registered your IP yet, beware of IP squatters that may have registered it on your behalf, and who then you need to pay out substantial amounts of money in order to actually receive that brand back. So even in those small situations, even if you've just gone to visit a supplier in China and you've given over your name card, which has your logo, you need to be aware of those situations. So really, IP, move it from the bottom of your checklist all the way to the top. So let's look now at why companies are leaving Hong Kong, or why companies are not attracted to Hong Kong anymore. So the first is the umbrella revolution, which happened end of 2014, early 2015. Now, if you're looking at understanding one of the advantages for me was political stability. And I say political stability because, quite frankly, it's still under common law. The political system is quite straightforward. And for me, the real issue around the umbrella revolution doesn't have to do with the Chinese government taking over, becoming communist, not being democratic enough. Yes, one of the issues is obviously you don't have a free voting system, but really the central issue of why students are going on the streets and protesting is primarily because the standard of living in Hong Kong is so high that people cannot afford to live there. People that are authentic Hong Kong Chinese, born and raised, are not able to survive in that standard of living. And they're complaining. They can't afford rents. Nobody can afford to buy property. Medical system is expensive unless you have insurance. It is difficult to live in Hong Kong because of these issues. And that is primarily why people are going on the streets. And if you look at the protests, the majority of the protesters are actually college students, college graduates that are looking for change. And they want the change to come from the government. Now, did the umbrella revolution affect any foreign investors, multinationals that are located in the Hong Kong market? The only comment that has truly come back has been, well, traffic was a disaster. We had to find new routes to go to and from the office or to take our kids to and from schools. But ultimately, did it affect my business? No, it did not. I was still able to bring goods in and out of Hong Kong. I had no issues with my bank accounts. Business ran smoothly. It was only the retail outlets that were located around the protesting sites, which is actually where the government buildings are located, that truly suffered, and many of them had to close shop. And most of those were local Hong Kong owned businesses versus the luxury retail outlets. So for me, looking at Occupy Central protests, looking at the media and how they portrayed the umbrella revolution, you would truly think that there was political instability because there was fighting, there was all of these types of things. But ultimately, when you were sitting in Hong Kong on a day-to-day basis, did it affect you? Actually not. It didn't affect your business, and it didn't affect your private life either. So for me, did companies truly leave Hong Kong, or are they not coming to Hong Kong because of this? Absolutely not. It doesn't even come up in conversation in relation to the protests and the umbrella revolution. What does come up in conversation is the difficulty in terms of opening the bank accounts. Now, one thing I want to start off in terms of the bank accounts. Point one, it is not impossible to open an account. Number two, the banks are required by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority to do much stricter compliance procedures. If you look at recruitment statistics in Hong Kong, the primary sector that is recruiting tremendous amounts of people is the compliance division within banks. Why? Because they want to do an absolute thorough check on you prior to opening a bank account. In addition to that, they want to see that the business that you're setting up in Hong Kong is going to be operational. Now, the verbal feedback that we've gotten from many banks is, if you just set up a holding company in Hong Kong that does no type of business whatsoever, what can I do? I actually as a bank lose money off of you versus actually gaining anything. And therefore they're less inclined to open those types of bank accounts. So what is the key to understanding opening bank accounts in Hong Kong? The key is, one, patience. If you want to open a bank account in Hong Kong, it's absolutely feasible. It's just going to take time. So whereas previously you could open a bank account within 7 to 10 working days, now you're looking at between 8 to 10 weeks. So obviously that is a restriction, you know, and a slight contradiction from my point of view, because you can establish your company within 5 to 7 working days, but then it takes you 8 to 10 weeks to open a bank account. Obviously nobody is happy in regards to that, because it does prevent you from starting your business for a period of 2 to 3 months. Absolutely understandable. But if you believe that Hong Kong is the right jurisdiction for you because you have optimized your structures in such a way that Hong Kong will benefit you, then you need to develop patience and realize that the bank account opening will happen. It just will take time. They will ask you for a whole series of documentation that you need to provide. In addition to that, as part of the documentation, what do you need to do? You need to make sure your Hong Kong company is operational. The bank wants to know that you have substance. There's a lot of confusion in terms of what substance actually means. Substance means basically you're going to open an office in Hong Kong, you're going to employ people in Hong Kong, you're going to have your own office, registered office address in Hong Kong, and you're going to show that you're going to be fully operational in order to build your business and to have transactions, which is the key for the bank, transactions, whether it's TT transfers, letters of credit that are running through your bank account. That's what they want to see. If you are planning to utilize Hong Kong as a tax haven in order to evade taxes, which is traditionally what a lot of people were doing, the same with Seychelles, British Virgin Islands, Caymans, etc., etc. This concept does not exist anymore. The global world is becoming tax transparent. The global world is trying to instill a philosophy of creating substance and being operational on the ground in the jurisdiction that you're locating in, and Hong Kong is having that. So if you are wanting to set up Hong Kong purely as a holding, it is doable. The banks don't like it, but it is occurring that bank accounts can still be opened. The process is much longer than the 8 to 10 weeks. It is still manageable and doable, but you need to have had a past relationship with the bank in order to be able to, you do, by the way, not your corporate service provider. You need to have had the relationship with the bank in order to be able to open such accounts. So, are there difficulties? Are there obstacles? Yes, there are. But when I speak to my clients and they get so frustrated by these things and they expect me to have the relationships with the banks to open the accounts, my relationships that I have built, or the relationships my father has built over the last 40 years of being located in Hong Kong, are all put in a rubbish bin. Because what the banks want is a relationship with the client, with you. They want to develop that relationship from day one. And they then want to see that business is developing and that they can earn some money off of you, basically. That's their whole goal. So if you feel that Hong Kong is the right jurisdiction for you, it ticks off all the boxes that you want, then the issue is be prepared and be patient in relation to the Hong Kong bank account opening processes, because it does take a long time. And I highly recommend that you travel physically to Hong Kong, meet with the banks, understand the dilemmas that they themselves are going through in terms of compliance procedures, and choose a bank that would fit your criteria. You know, there's not just HSBC out there. There are a whole bunch of other banks that exist that could help you in terms of opening the necessary accounts. And if you have a past relationship with the bank in your home jurisdiction, use that bank to open the accounts then that are located in Hong Kong, especially if they have subsidiaries in Hong Kong. Now, one needs to create economic and commercial substance in Hong Kong. Now, why is this causing companies to either not come into the market or is causing companies to leave Hong Kong? Well, this is primarily because if you want to apply for profits tax exemption in Hong Kong, which basically means instead of paying the 16.5% profits tax and now you're only paying 0%, then you shouldn't have economic and commercial substance in order to benefit from that. So there is a big contradiction in Hong Kong right now because the banks don't want to see that you don't have substance, but then you cannot benefit from the tax advantage of declaring tax exemption. So what is substance? And I highlighted that in point 6 because ultimately that's really what everybody is focused on. One is having local resident directors, having a lease agreement with an office space, having employment contracts in place and having employees on your payroll that are based in Hong Kong, this is really the main three substance needs that the banks require, and potentially your tax officer in your home jurisdiction, depending on how you are creating and structuring this Hong Kong company. So be aware of the topic of economic and commercial substance. Discuss it with your tax advisors in your home jurisdiction. Discuss it with your corporate providers or tax advisors located in Hong Kong to make sure that you have the right system in place. Now, I've put an example here. If you are a company from the US, I just wanted to highlight here what you would need to consider from a US perspective. So, and you can compare this to if your home jurisdiction is Germany, France, Australia, UK, etc. So obviously, the issue from a US level is, does the Hong Kong company have substance? Are there local resident directors? Is there a lease agreement in place? Because otherwise they may consider, the US tax officers may consider Hong Kong as a flow-through entity, meaning that you are just trying to avoid paying taxes in the US. And as such, they then require to see additional documentation to see what type of substance actually exists in the Hong Kong market, which is why it's so key to talk to your tax advisors in the US to make sure that when you start expanding globally, everybody is on the same page, everybody knows why the structure has been formed and developed, and everybody understands the flow of transactions that is going through, and everybody understands where people are employed, where the directors are based, etc., etc., etc. So commercial economic substance become a big topic for many people, and it is the reason why many companies are leaving Hong Kong. It's primarily for the fact that now with the whole situations with banks and things like that, they're finding out that Hong Kong just doesn't offer the advantages that it used to. But this can only be realized and defined once you've gone through a simulation with your tax advisors in both jurisdictions to understand what is your eventual profitability. Why are companies leaving Hong Kong? Well, bad news for Hong Kong is always good news for Singapore, and quite frankly, vice versa. You have a lot of regional headquarters that were originally based in Hong Kong that have now moved to Singapore, and you have a lot of regional headquarters that were based in Singapore that are now moving to Hong Kong. It is a constant battle between Hong Kong and Singapore. What is the better jurisdiction? It's a constant battle. When Hong Kong said that it was going to reduce its profits tax from 17% down to 16.5%, Singapore within 6 months did exactly the same. It lowered its profits tax by 0.5%. Hong Kong developed the Cyberport and the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park. Singapore is also now developing these zones in order to attract certain investors in certain industries. It's always a constant battle, a constant fight. If you are interested in our webinar series, then I do recommend you to join Friday's webinar session, where we will really be looking at the direct comparisons between Hong Kong and Singapore in terms of compliance, administration, legal, IP, to give you a better understanding from a corporate service provider's world what the advantages are from both jurisdictions. Ultimately, my advice is the following. Hong Kong has always been used traditionally to enter China. It has been known in the media as the stepping stone, the gateway into the Chinese market. But in addition to that, Hong Kong is also used to expand regionally into other Asian jurisdictions, but generally on the east coast of Asia. Now in the media, you see a lot of topics being spoken about the ASEAN region, developments in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Malaysia, Indonesia, and all of that is being centralized out of Singapore. Why? Purely because of location. Location, location, location. Singapore is much closer to those jurisdictions than Hong Kong is, just like Hong Kong is literally a stepping stone away from China versus Singapore. So location is always a key factor when deciding Hong Kong or Singapore. Talking to a lot of expatriates who are in that deciding phase of and are being given the liberty to decide which jurisdiction they want, a lot of them are saying Singapore is better for health reasons, pollution reasons than Hong Kong is. I personally feel that's a objective point of view. That's your decision. If you believe, I mean, I don't have an opinion one way or another. I don't think Singapore's pollution is fantastic either, considering that it's right on the tip of Malaysia, and if you have bad winds, then you're also going to get a lot of smog coming into the city. And that's completely up to you to decide. If you look at standards of living, the last statistic I saw was that Singapore had surpassed Hong Kong in terms of standards of living. So again, you know, when you look at cost of living in terms of rental prices, office rent, schools, all of these types of things, it is so comparable one on the other. That's a very difficult decision to make. So from my perspective, I always see the battle more in relation to location versus in relation to actual structuring and tax and legal and IP issues. Almost all the advantages that I offered you today probably would be the same advantages for Singapore if you would look at market entry into the Asian region, to give you an example. So, you know, for me, the battles between Hong Kong and Singapore are continuously ongoing, and from my perspective, one doesn't win the other. You personally just need to look at your business model and analyze specifically, where do you want to be? Where do you want to be located? Where for your business in the short term and in the long term is going to be an advantage for you? Now for Hong Kong, what is the way forward for Hong Kong? In summation, for me, Hong Kong still offers tremendous advantages as a gateway into China, as a gateway just generally into the Asian region. It's a paradise for innovative startups and SMEs wanting to claim a stake in the Asian market, but not willing yet to make such a high investment. They want to start slow. They want to do market research. For me, Hong Kong offers what China still does not 100% offer, which is a melting pot of cultures, qualified, skilled laborers, limited language barriers, an attractive tax scheme that can be really optimized for your entire global structure, very simple administrative measures in terms of incorporation, as well as the legal tax compliance and corporate compliance that has to occur thereafter. What a lot of people aren't aware of, particularly entrepreneurs, is that the government provides subsidies and funding to entrepreneurs and startups that are looking to go into the market as well. You know, one aspect I didn't mention that I want to mention, because I'm comparing this now in my mind to China, is visa issues. If you come from a Western country and you have a European passport or US passport, you have the liberty to stay in Hong Kong for 90 days, which is 3 months, to analyze the market, investigate the market. In China, visa restrictions are so strict, in addition to any other emerging Asian market, Cambodia, Vietnam, etc. You know, consider the visa the visa criterias just for a moment and understand that Hong Kong gives you that option to stay in the jurisdiction for 90 days without having any issues. Now, obviously, we all know that mainland China is growing. Mainland China, Chinese companies are now expanding overseas. And as we saw in the first slide that I showed, there are now about 120 mainland Chinese companies that have set up regional offices in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, because it's always been the gateway into China, is now the gateway for mainland Chinese companies into the overseas jurisdictions. And no other jurisdiction can compete with that. And if you are a company that wants to attract overseas investments from the mainland Chinese, whether it be in property and assets, in formulating joint ventures, distribution rights, etc., then Hong Kong is really the right place to meet that level of people and companies from China, and Hong Kong is truly utilizing that to its advantage, which is a great step forward, and it's maintaining that relationship with the mainland Chinese market. So all in all, for me, Hong Kong still has tremendous advantages that it offers to foreign investors that are coming into the market. The real obstacle that is deterring people, and I'll mention it again, is the bank account openings. But if you are looking to set up an entity that is purely there to evade taxes, or as some clients say, I just want to lower my tax obligations, you need to pay tax somewhere in the world. And if you're trying to build up that type of structure, Hong Kong is not the right place for you at all. What Hong Kong is trying to promote is operational businesses. It's trying to promote itself not as a tax haven, but as a place where we can offer you multiple advantages in terms of tax optimization. We can offer you skilled laborers. We can offer you the advantage of our expertise in terms of how to get into the Chinese market. You can use Hong Kong as a market research location. If you're an entrepreneur, you can use us as a startup place to build your business for the Asian market. So, excuse me. So that is really why or how Hong Kong should move forward in the future in terms of developing itself against all the other Asian markets that are out there. That's the end of today's presentation. I've just seen that we've run over the 1 hour mark. I do want to go through one or two questions that have come up, which I think are quite interesting. The first is, you have not touched, or you've touched very briefly on the advantage Hong Kong offers, which is offshore tax. Can you advise whether there are any developments that have occurred on this topic? Yes, I spoke very briefly about the profits tax exemption, which is another way of saying offshore tax. Basically, there are no developments in the market. I mean, a question that I get asked quite often is, do I believe the Hong Kong government might take or remove the offshore tax advantage away? Slowly, the Hong Kong government is kind of doing that already by the difficulties in terms of opening the bank accounts, where the banks are saying, we want to see substance, we want to see economic and commercial substance. Are there rumors saying they're going to take it away? No, they're not. I thus far have not seen any developments that are going to change the offshore tax regime. There are issues which will start next year in terms of the automatic exchange of information, which is between various jurisdictions about sharing information about the subsidiaries you're setting up in other jurisdictions. So again, this might affect your offshore tax situation. Other than that, there are no rumors in terms of the Inland Revenue Department saying we're going to remove it completely. But from my experience, what I am seeing is that a lot of foreign tax advisors located in the other jurisdictions, they don't like to see the constructs that are occurring with the offshore tax. And they don't like to see that you are declaring offshore tax in Hong Kong. They want to see that you're actually paying the 16.5%, which, when you really think about it, 16.5% profits tax compared to any other jurisdiction, it's really peanuts. So, you got to take that into a balance. Another question is, what is my opinion in terms of the free trade zones in China and whether they threaten Hong Kong in any shape or form. So as you're all aware about, or probably I assume you're all aware, in 2013 the Chinese government came out with the Shanghai Pilot Free Trade Zone. Since 2013, so actually 3 years now, it's expanded into 7 different zones located in 7 different jurisdictions within China. There's Tianjin, there is Qianhai, and there are also other locations in Chengdu, etc. Now, being on the ground in China, let's first start off with what's my opinion of the free trade zones. These pilot free trade zones, what is the primary function? The primary function is to have liberalization of the renminbi currency. That's why they were set up. Who is that really going to affect? It is going to affect the Chinese investors that are looking to invest overseas. Why? Because currently the Chinese government has no control over how certain Chinese investors are making their investments overseas. By having this free trade zone, they are encouraging Chinese investors to put their money in the free trade zone, do the renminbi convertibility, currency exchange, so that they can see how much investments they're making overseas. And it's more of a control system, in my opinion, it's more of a control system than anything else. Now, obviously, they had to match that with inward investment into China. And if you look at the inward investments, basically, there's no big advantages. In Shanghai, for example, no tax advantage. You're still paying 25% profits tax. If you look at the industries, well, that's because basically the catalog of restricted industries has become more liberalized, but not just in the free trade zones. It's actually occurred throughout the Chinese market. If you look at customs liberalizations, yes, that is an advantage, but that was an advantage that already existed within certain bonded zones for the last 10-15 years. So when I look at the free trade zones and I look at what it has to offer, only very few industries does it really offer something of great advantage. One of them for me is the e-commerce sector, where really the whole customs liberalization and the fact that you can develop a fulfillment center in the free trade zone, that's a huge advantage. And I know that I believe it's Amazon or Alibaba was setting up one of the first fulfillment centers in the Shanghai Pilot Free Trade Zone. So for e-commerce, I think it does offer quite a lot of advantages. If you are a typical small, medium-sized company, the free trade zone does not offer you any other beneficial advantages compared to being located outside. In fact, from most SMEs that I know, that I've spoken to, that are located in the free trade zone, it's actually provided them with greater difficulties because Shanghai, for example, it's located about an hour and a half from downtown. One-way drive. So they didn't even think about distance. They have had a lot of difficulties in terms of finding employees that are willing to work out there, which has actually caused them to set up a branch office in downtown Shanghai in order to be able to attract the appropriate laborers and workers and employees, especially administrative staff. So there are a lot of issues in terms of this that people were not really weighing on in terms of these pros and cons that might exist. There are quite a few other questions that have arisen, but as we are already way past the 1 hour mark, I'm going to answer those questions directly to the individual attendees. I apologize for running out of time. I hope that everybody enjoyed today's presentation. If you do have questions that you didn't put inside the questions panel section, please don't hesitate to contact me. My information is listed here and I would be happy to get in touch with you. Note that we have another 4 days of webinar sessions. Tomorrow is in relation to talent acquisition. On Wednesday, we'll be looking at Singapore. We'll be looking at supply chain management, utilizing Hong Kong or Singapore. And on Friday, we have a very exciting webinar session where we do have Battle of the Asian Jurisdictions, and we will be having two consultants. One will be Singapore, one will be Hong Kong, battling it out on the field to analyze really what is the better jurisdiction. If you are not yet subscribed, please subscribe to our e-campaigns and our magazines. It's all free of charge. We publish quite a lot of resources through YouTube and LinkedIn, so please do subscribe to those channels as well. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thank you and goodbye.